สวัสดีค่ะ Good morning
สวัสดีค่ะทุกท่าน
Good morning the Honorable Tony Blair and the Honorable Marty Artisaries Excellencies Ladies and Gentlemen First of all I wish to extend a warm welcome to all of you to the first of the special lecture series on Uniting for the Future Learning from Each Other's Experience The Royal Thai Government would like to express our sincere appreciation to the distinguished speakers who have given us their valuable time to share their experience with us today. I also like to thank the Thewawong Waropakan Institute of Foreign Affairs and the Institute of Securities and International Study of Chulalongkorn Universities for hosting this important event. The intention of this lecture series is to provide an open platform for all to participate in sharing experience, ideas, and even personal stories, so we can learn from each other to create unities for peace and prosperity of our citizens. I believe the first lectures and future forums will continue to developing an understanding of issues concerned. More importantly, I hope that it will also provide a basic tools, practical approach that can be implemented. Sharing views on ideologies is important, but in the end, we must be able to put words into practical for the solution to be long-lasting. Ladies and gentlemen, I live in a time when democracy is at a crossroads. There are still some attempts to suppress the people's freedoms in many places all over the world. Many of you here believe in democracy and have worked hard to protect and defend the principles. Democracy guarantees the rights and liberties of the common individuals. Democracy encourages individual talent to flourish, allowing equal economic opportunities to take root. And democracy respects diversity and allows any difference to be resolved in a peaceful manner. And we care deeply about the importance of unities for achieving long-lasting peace and stability. This is because stability provides the basis for all nations and regions to ensure sustainable economic and social development. The challenge for our generation is to build a future to provide our children with the kind of stability where there are less conflicts and ensure an environment where they are given equal opportunities to prosper. The key is for us to work toward a future built around a secure foundation of democracy. And when I talk about democracy, I do not just mean a system where the majority is the government and the minority is opposition. I mean a culture where all citizens respect each other's view and where the rule of law is enforced and respected by all. Ladies and gentlemen, it is for the next generation that we are here today. We need to learn from each other, and I believe that all Thais can benefit from international experience. In particular, on how others have resolved political conflicts and promoted the development of democracies. Also on how they have encouraged all sides to set aside different and work together for a secure democratic futures. Of course, we want to hear about the success, but also we want to learn from the failure as well, especially on what happens when unity cannot be achieved and on the consequence of political conflict when there is no reconciliations. Where there is no reconciliations. I hope that the lesson learned from case studies of other countries will inspire all of us to reflect more on what is best for our countries. This will allow us to take steps forward together in democratic manners as we seek to unite for the future for the next generation. Thank you again, special guest with us today. So I think that will be given a very valuable time for Thailand. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, to come here. And thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Please kindly remain on stage. As next is a picture session, a picture opportunity with today's chair of the opening ceremony. I'd like to call upon our honorable leaders, experts, and distinguished guests to please kindly join Prime Minister of Thailand, Her Excellency Yingluck Shinawatra, for a group photo. So please kindly come up to the stage. The Prime Minister has been very kind today, coming as chair of the opening session, the special lecture series, Uniting for the Future, Learning from Each Other's Experiences. Joining us along with distinguished experts who in a short while will be sharing their views on democratization and also conflict management. Special lecture series, ladies and gentlemen, has been initiated with the objective of raising public awareness on the significance of democracy and other fundamental issues for the Thai society. It is also aimed at launching a process of internal reflection on the necessity of working out differences in a peaceful manner for the benefit of the country. How about another big round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen, for the Thai Prime Minister and also for our distinguished guests joining us today. Thank you very much, Your Excellencies. It's a pleasure having all of you joining us in this morning's session. Next will be a keynote address, ladies and gentlemen. We will have to reset the stage a bit for the upcoming session, which will be moderated by Associate Professor Dr. Pithamang Phomsuthirak, who is the Director of the Institute of Security and International Studies. As mentioned, ladies and gentlemen, up next is the highlight keynote speeches by our honorable speakers, and our moderator for this upcoming session is Associate Professor Dr. Pithamang Phomsuthirak, Director of the Institute of Security and International Studies. Dr. Pithamang is an Associate Professor of International Political Economy at the Faculty of Political Science, Chulalongkorn University. He has written numerous articles, books and book chapters on Thailand's politics, political economy, foreign policy and media, as well as ASEAN and East Asian security and economic cooperation. He is frequently quoted and his op-eds regularly appear in international and local media, including a column with the Bangkok Post and also with the Straits Times. Dr. Thitinan has worked for the BBC World Service, the Economist Intelligence Unit, and independent economic analysis, as well as consulting projects related to Thailand's macroeconomy and politics. He received his Bachelor of Arts from the University of California at Santa Barbara, Master of Arts from the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, and a doctorate degree from the London School of Economics. His PhD work on the political economy of the 1997 Thai economic crisis was awarded the United Kingdom's Lord Bryce Prize for Best Dissertation in Comparative and International Politics. Dr. Thitinan has lectured at many local and overseas universities. He was also a visiting professor at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in spring of 2011 and a visiting scholar at Stanford University's Humanities Center and Center on Democracy, Development and the Rule of Law in spring of 2010. He currently serves on the editorial boards of Contemporary Southeast Asia, Southeast Asia Research, Asian Politics and Policy, and Journal of Current Southeast Asian Affairs. In just a few moments, the stage will be ready, ladies and gentlemen, of which we'll be handing over the stage and the session to Dr. Thitinan Phongsuthirath. And of course, we have three distinguished speakers who will be joining us in this session. And I believe we'll be hearing some really insightful experiences from the world leaders.
จะได้รับฟังความคิดเห็นจากท่านผู้นำต่างๆ
Okay, so this is going to be the way it has to be. Honorables, Excellencies, Professors, students, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. I am not used to this setting. Normally we would have a seminar at my university. It would be in a somewhat dilapidated seminar room, not very well designed, but here we are. At this point, please let me invite Honorable Mr. Tony Blair, Honorable Mr. Malti Atasari, and Miss Priscilla Hayner to the stage, please. Okay, now I would like to begin with your permission, Honorables.
To achieve reconciliation.
Okay, now, thank you very much for that. I just wanted to get the story straight. We're not working for the government, and we actually are just an academic institute at the university, and we have, if you see the activities that we've had over the years, we focus on international affairs, domestic politics, you name it, ASEAN, East Asia, regional architecture, and so on. So today we're doing something that has been conflated with the government's Political Reform Council. Now, we want to have reconciliation and peace and stability in Thailand, no doubt, and the modalities are different. I think that democracy is not a one-size-fits-all affair and challenge. So today I've been asked, Honorables, Mrs. Hayner, my relatives and friends, they call me and they text me and send me emails on Facebook and they say, what are they going to talk about? And why are we paying them money to come and talk about this? What would they know about Thailand? On the other hand, I've also had calls saying, oh, this is a great thing that you're doing. It's going to promote reconciliation and compromise in our country. So in equal measure, you can see that we are a divided society. And it's not uncommon. I think that Mr. Blair has just flown in this morning from the Middle East. And he has such stamina that he comes right straight here to this seminar. You know, around the world, one theme that we're seeing is that the working consensus that we used to have has unraveled. That consensus, that order could be coercive, as in some places, or it could be pragmatic, as here. But that order, that consensus in Thailand now has broken down, and we're in search for a new consensus, a new balance, a new moving balance. So today I tell people that Mr. Blair's office has insisted that they have not been paid. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that they have not. So there's no payment here, and I take it at face value because I think that they have misled us. They would be in trouble if it's found out. So I think it's in good spirit. Thank you very much, Honourables, for sharing your thoughts, your experiences with us. I don't think that we will solve anything today. The Thai people collectively are in the process of regaining their footing. Now, I have to say that we have worked very hard to promote balance in this endeavor, on this platform. We've invited the one side of our divide, namely, in particular, the Democrat Party, and we have some Democrat members here with us. And I recognize them, Dr. Surin Pisawant, who has been the Secretary General of ASEAN, Ajahn Graisak Chunwant, also a Democrat senior member. And others, I'm sure, are watching on television. So I have to cover for them a little bit. You know, this could be an exercise where what the Thais we would say, "Put eng eng," we would just say, you know, you say your speeches, and then everything ends happily, and then we move forward. But in fact, one half of our divide is not here. So we have to take that into account. Now, we have some extra time because if you look at the agenda, we actually have gained about 20-25 minutes, so the speakers can go on for a bit longer, up to a half hour, if you like. And I will go down the row. I don't need to go into a long introduction about Tony Blair. I think that most of the Thai people are watching today because you have kind of a superstar pool. You know, this whole event is like the Tony Blair et al. Event. And Mr. Blair, of course, is an international statesman of exceptional talent, accomplishment, energy. And he has been known as the main instrumental driver and mediator of the Good Friday Agreement. So I was in the UK, in fact, in the late 1990s. I still remember the day that it was signed on the Easter weekend in 1998. It's quite something for Northern Ireland to have that agreement, which laid the basis, in fact, for what we're seeing now in the UK with the Scottish movement, the independence movement, and so on, the devolution that stemmed from that agreement. And then Mr. Blair also is known for his efforts on the Middle East peace process. He has a foundation, he is an activist as well. So we will look forward to his experiences. Now, there's one issue here that has been mentioned but not amplified. We have a deadly Malay Muslim insurgency in the south. So we have two major conflicts in Thailand. One is a national conflict, and you might have seen this being manifested with attractive colors, red, yellow, and then after that they decided to have different colors, so the multicolors and so on. So these are the national political conflict that we have rooted in disagreements about how our future should be. At the same time, in the south, we have almost 10 years now a flare-up, intense and deadly ongoing insurgency that has claimed more than 5,300 lives. So you are not confined to discussing either. You can discuss anything you like, and then we'll hear from Honorable Mr. Antasari, Nobel Prize winner, and then Ms. Hena, right down the road. But first, Mr. Blair, the floor is yours.
โนเบลแต่แรกทีเดียวขอเรียนเชิญท่านอดีตนายกรัฐมนตรีโทนี่แบร์ก่อนเลยนะครับ
Thank you very much, Doctor, for that
ขอบพระคุณมากเลยครับ
interesting introduction.
นั่นเป็นการแนะนำที่น่าสนใจ
Covered a lot there. Just for the record, by the way, and no, I'm not being paid. I'm here because you invited me. เพราะว่าท่านได้เชิญผมมาผมไม่ได้รับอะไรเลยนะครับเนี่ย I'm here also because I believe in
ผมมาที่นี่
the process
เพ
of
ราะผมเชื่อ
reconciliation.
ในเรื่องของกระบวนการ
The many areas of the world that I've worked in.
ซึ่งเป็นหลายๆด้านซึ่ง
Reconciliation is a huge challenge. It's a difficult challenge, but it's one that's worth engaging in. Because I know that colours are very politicized here in Thailand. I've got a blue tie on. I thought that would be safe. In my country, by the way, it wouldn't be. So, first of all, I think it's very important to say, I mean, I'm really delighted to be back here in Thailand. I'm particularly honoured to be sharing a platform with Priscilla Hena, and also someone who's long track record on issues to do with harmony and reconciliation, and with my good friend, the former President of Finland, Martti Ahtisaari, who's a Nobel Prize winner, but also someone who I know from my time working with in office is someone of deep wisdom and understanding of these issues, and has made a huge contribution to world peace over the years. So it's a real pleasure to be with both of you here. And something else we should just get out of the way at the very beginning. In the end, Thailand's problems will be solved by Thais, right, not by outsiders. So we're here not to give lectures, but to share experience. And in the end, you know, how these problems are resolved are going to be issues that you are going to have to tackle here. But it seems to be very sensible, as we often did, by the way, particularly in the process of peace in Northern Ireland, to simply learn from the experiences of people from around the world. And I was heavily involved, obviously, in the Northern Ireland peace process, in the Middle East peace process as well. As the doctor just indicated, I just came from the Middle East this morning, and also, to a degree, in what happened during my time in office in the Balkans. And both President Ahtisaari and myself are veterans of European Council meetings, which are a perpetual process of reconciliation attempts, certainly from my experience. So what I'm about to talk to you about today are the lessons, the things that I can take from my own experience. And if you're interested in listening, then this is how I would summarize it. And I really want to put before you 5 principles that I learned from being engaged in these processes of reconciliation over the years. And the first is this, that reconciliation happens when the sense of shared opportunity is greater than the separate sense of grievance. In other words, you're always going to have a situation in which that sense of grievance is there. That's why there's something that is the subject matter for the debate about reconciliation. But the context in which reconciliation works is a context in which that sense that there is a tremendous opportunity that people want to share, that shared opportunity becomes more important for people to achieve than to dwell on the past grievances. And here for Thailand, if I can offer this view as an outsider, this is a country of extraordinary potential. Its economy has grown in an amazing way in these last few decades. It's a world leader in many aspects of industry and services. You think of automobiles and hard disks and tourism. In terms of its population, around 67 million. It's one of the larger countries of the world today. It's a country that's rich in culture and history. I mean, the challenges are very obvious. Challenges to do with inequality and poverty, particularly rural poverty. Challenges, as we all have, on education systems and healthcare. And of course, the challenge of how the country reaches the next stage of development. Because it's come a long way over these past decades, but I know from the friends I have here that there is a powerful sense that the country has to aspire to a new stage of development. But there's no doubt, if you analyze the situation of Thailand objectively, it is a country that could and should become a regional and even a global power. So I would say that the shared sense of opportunity and of potential is extraordinarily large. But of course, what it needs is a united determination to overcome the strong feelings about the past in order to develop and exploit that shared sense of opportunity. So, for example, in Northern Ireland, what we found was that one of the ways in which we brought about reconciliation was that people started to understand that in the north of Ireland and the south of Ireland, they could actually do an immense amount together economically within the European Union. That there was a whole series of potential opportunities that were being squandered as a result of the disagreement. And that created a sense in which people felt, look, there's an enormous amount of opportunity here, so let's find a way of reconciling our differences so that we can grasp that opportunity and move the island of Ireland forward. I mean, in Israel and Palestine right now, there should be that sense of shared opportunity, but the question is, will it happen? Now, as a result of the efforts of John Kerry, and he's done this with remarkable vigor and determination, we've now got a peace process back on track between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but one thing that will be very important is that the context of that peace negotiation has got to be one in which people feel, look, there's a bigger prize here that we can grasp if we're prepared to reconcile our differences. So that is the first thing. There's got to be a galvanizing sense of shared opportunity that overcomes the separate sense of grievance. The second principle is this, because a situation in which you're talking about reconciliation necessarily means there is a deep and profound disagreement and difference which has to be reconciled. And the second principle that I learned from my experience is that the past can be honestly examined, but it can never be judged in a way that is going to be to the satisfaction of everyone. And so you have to accept there are going to remain two sides with their own narrative about the past. That, in a way, you're never going to get over. However, you can honestly examine the past in a way that allows you to move forward for the future. So, again, here I would say that the hardest thing is to be able to accept that that sense of grievance will never be fully healed but nonetheless to accept that you're going to move forward in any event. So to give you some very obvious examples from my experience, one of the toughest things in the Northern Ireland context and in the Middle East context is the release of prisoners, right? Because there are two separate narratives about Northern Ireland. One is that the IRA were terrorists who were killing innocent people, and that is the view that the unionist community had in Northern Ireland and has today. I mean, that's not changed. And the other narrative from the Republican side is that these people were freedom fighters and they were oppressed by the British and by the unionist community. And they're not going to change that view of the past. Right? So in other words, the reconciliation is never going to be about people changing their mind about the past. It's really going to be about changing the mind about the future. And this is painful to do, by the way. So, the doctor was talking about when you were there in the UK and when I was Prime Minister and we brought about the Good Friday Agreement, which was the peace deal that allowed us then to move forward. One of the items of that agreement was the release of IRA prisoners. And I have to say that when it actually happened, it was one thing to agree it, but when it happened, it very nearly destroyed the deal. Because, you know, if you were the victim of an act of terrorism, then, you know, you see these people who were responsible for it, and so suppose you lost a member of your family, you see the person responsible for it walking free, celebrating, you know, you're going to feel angry about it. And there's no way out of that. And, you know, one of the things that was most difficult for us is that actually the worst terrorist act, and fortunately, actually the last terrorist act came after the agreement, after the peace deal. And I remember going and visiting, actually with President Clinton, the families of the victims of this terrorist attack, in which, you know, many people lost their lives and many people were scarred for life. And, you know, you felt the intensity of the grief and the anger. Now, some of those families actually said to me, and it was very moving that they did this, "You've got to carry on going for peace because I don't want this happening to someone else." So, you know, you can get that enormously altruistic and sensitive response, but it would be crazy not to accept there's also deep anger there. For the relaunch of the Middle East peace negotiations, just a few weeks ago, there were prisoners released. Palestinian prisoners have been in prison a long time, but, you know, the families of the Israeli victims, many of them were protesting very strongly that this was a breach of justice to release these people. So what I'm really saying here is that, and you can see this, by the way, in some of the coverage and the analysis of the Truth for Reconciliation Commission for Thailand here, you know, when you study that report, you can see some of the same types of issues. The point is this, that you can honestly try and examine and bring out the sense of grievance of both sides, but you're going to have to accept that that sense of grievance will remain. The task of reconciliation is not to try and abolish it, but to try and overcome it. Because trying to get rid of it and excise it from people's minds is just not going to be possible. The third thing, however, is that if it is impossible to banish the sense of past injustice, in order for there to be reconciliation, there has to be a future framework that people do accept as just. In other words, whatever arguments will carry on about what happened in the past and who was to blame, the essence of reconciliation is at least to be able to establish a framework for future cooperation that people regard as just and objective, and where the root causes of the dispute or the conflict can be addressed. And this is enormously difficult, but of fundamental importance. So we would never have achieved peace in Northern Ireland but for the Good Friday Agreement, and the essential thing about the Good Friday Agreement was that it provided a way in which two communities with irreconcilable past grievances were able nonetheless to see there was a future way forward that was fair. And in the end, the essence was a kind of compromise, really, where the nationalists or Republicans accepted that Northern Ireland would remain part of the United Kingdom for as long as the majority of people in Northern Ireland wanted it, which was a big compromise because previously they had always said, no, it is the people of Ireland as a whole that should determine this. And the Unionist community also had to make a big compromise, because as they had always said, the majority should rule in Northern Ireland. But because they were always going to be in the majority, that was never going to provide a basis for peace. So we had to develop a framework in which power was shared. So you had the principle from the Republican side conceded that Northern Ireland would remain part of the United Kingdom for as long as people wanted it to, and on the other side, but whilst that happened, there was going to be some sharing of power so that the nationalist community didn't feel shut out and excluded. In the Middle East right now, we have a framework, if we can get to the details of it, that gives us a chance to move forward. And what is that framework? 2 states. Right? So in a way, you're accepting you're never going to be able to reconcile the differences in the past about the creation of the State of Israel, the refugees that came from the Palestinian side, what should be the right solution to this. In the end, people have decided the only way this works is that alongside the State of Israel comes into being a State of Palestine. It's what we call the 2-state solution. But what I'm saying is that you can only create peace if people see whatever the disputes about the past, the future has a framework that is fair and seen to be fair and just. And one also that is capable of dealing with the root causes. Because usually with any conflict, there are issues around which the conflict revolves. Right? There could be issues to do with the constitution, or there could be issues to do with who took power and how. Right? Those are the issues that are on the surface. But usually there's underneath some root causes, some things that have given rise to these deep differences. And, you know, again, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission here, you know, discuss some of those causes and what they might be and how they might be dealt with. My point is very simple, that if you want a reconciliation process to work, you've got to have a framework going forward that allows those root causes to be dealt with in a way that is fair and which balances the situation in such a way that whatever people say about the past, in the future, they think there's a better chance of doing it in a way that is accepted. The fourth principle is this, that when the purpose of of what is being created as a future framework is that it's anchored in democracy, then I would say that this principle is extremely important. The fourth principle is a genuine democracy is all that works. And a genuine democracy involves both the substance and the form of democracy together. Now, what do I mean by that? Countries, and I work probably now in about 20 different countries in the world, in one way or another. And countries are often divided by factions, by class, by religion, by race, by color. So it's not uncommon for countries to be one territory, but within that territory, for there to be deep divisions of one sort or another. That's why these issues to do with reconciliation are so important the world over. So, in a sense, here in Thailand, the divisions, you can analyze why they've come about, but it's not unusual that you will have such divisions. Each situation is unique, but there are often common characteristics in those divisions. And right now, as was being said a little earlier, all over the Middle East, for example, you've got experiments in democracy taking place. And, you know, around the world today, there are examples of very old democracies, very new democracies, and countries that hope to be democracies. And I think there are a couple of things that are very, very clear about genuine democracy. The first is, democracy is not just a way of voting, but a way of thinking. In other words, democracy is not just about how the majority takes power. It is crucially about how the majority then relates to the minority. And if we look at the Middle East today, and the work that I do not just in Israel and Palestine, but elsewhere, you know, part of the trouble is when democracy is seen as a kind of winner takes all. Right? And then you get a situation which majority comes to power, and then the minority feel as if they're kind of shut out and excluded. So, democracy, in my view, works only as a concept that is pluralistic in nature. Right? It's not about domination by one party. It's about a sense that you have a majority that comes to power in a democratic system, but there's still a shared space in which people cooperate and work together and actually share certain basic values. So that idea of democracy as a way of thinking and not just a way of voting is very important. And that's what I call the substance, not just the form of democracy. And it is buttressed by a second element, which is the rule of law. You know, the rule of law is something that I think is constantly underestimated in discussion about society, democracy, the economy, and a sense that there is a shared space of values. And one of the things that I constantly talk about in different parts of the world where there are countries that maybe have emerged from a period of conflict and got over the conflict and are searching for a way of anchoring their democracy securely. Alongside this idea that, you know, democracy is a way of thinking, not just a way of voting, it is the idea that the rule of law is independently and impartially administered. And this is important for society, for citizens to believe that if they go in front of a court, the court will decide objectively. It's important economically, because if people are going to come and invest in your country, they need to know that there's a rule of law that will be applied in an objective way. It's also important politically because in any system you're going to get checks and balances, and one of the important checks and balances is an independent judiciary. And this, by the way, can be very difficult for political leaders. I mean, I remember when I was Prime Minister of the UK, and I actually introduced for the first time in the UK a human rights legislation, which meant that for the first time, the Supreme Court in the UK, which we established, were able to overturn decisions of the executive or parliament on the basis they offended essential human rights. And this is a very big innovation. You know, we have a common law system. It was more common elsewhere in America or in, you know, where they have a written constitution, or in Europe. We have no written constitution in the UK, but and so there used to be a principle that if Parliament said X, then the courts couldn't intervene. But I changed this balance of power. And, you know, what happens is, you know, you're Prime Minister, you pass a piece of legislation, you think it's very important, then the courts come in and strike it down. It's a bit irritating when it happened from time to time. Okay. And I used to have a debate sometimes with my people, because they used to say to me, look, the judges are acting wrongly. They shouldn't be doing this. And I'd say, no, we've given them that right. And we've got to accept it. So I may wish they didn't do it, but we accept that they've done it, and we accept they have the right to do it. But it only works on the basis, as I believe with our courts in the UK, that justice will be independently and impartially administered. So that doesn't mean to say I agree with their decisions. I might disagree with their decisions. But I believe that there is an objectivity and fairness about the actual system. So the fourth principle, I think, is this: that democracy works, and works best as a source of reconciliation, when it is clear that it is genuine democracy, based on a pluralistic concept of society, a way of voting and thinking together, and based on a genuine adherence to the rule of law. And the fifth principle is this, and it's one that is very practical, but is often forgotten in today's world. That reconciliation is easier to achieve if the politics of a country as a whole is seen to be effective at delivering improvement for the people. In other words, you know, government has a challenge of honesty and a challenge of transparency, and these are really important issues. And around the world I often talk to people about, you know, obviously the need to push out corruption and get systems that are transparent and accountable and so on. But very often the biggest challenge for government is not just the challenge of transparency, but the challenge of efficacy. Can they get things delivered for the people? Because one of the things I always say to any new Prime Minister that comes in is, you know, the expectations of the people are always very large. And there was a famous American politician, Mario Cuomo, who once said that you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. Right? So when you're campaigning, everything's, you know, it's great. You're raising expectations. You get into government, it's tough. Then you've got to deliver. And that's a lot harder. And one basic lesson is that you deliver most when you reach out and try and build bridges in a non-partisan way. And so this is where, you know, you may have a huge number of differences and disagreements about the past, and you may require this process of reconciliation, but reconciliation will be easier to achieve if the government itself is operating effectively to deliver change for the people, and so they feel their lives are getting better. So one of the biggest problems we have in the Middle East right now is that the disparity between living standards in Israel and living standards in the Palestinian territory mean that unless people feel the peace process is actually going to bring benefit to them, and Palestinians in particular feel that they're going to get a rise in their living standards and additional prosperity, along with the justice of a state, if they don't feel that, they're far less inclined to put aside the differences and go for reconciliation. So this issue to do with how you reach out and become more inclusive is very, very important. And by the way, I think one huge challenge for Western democracy today is how to get out of a kind of paralysis of policy making where parties engage in issues in such a partisan way that they can't build any common bridges with each other, and therefore the country can't move forward. I mean, you think of what's happened in the US with the sort of paralysis in Congress over time. It's been, hugely debilitating, and it's kept back the economic recovery of the country. So, these issues to do with delivery for the people, change and reform, are of huge importance, and sometimes they can help when you reach out beyond the partisan divide and you start cooperating in areas of policy. Then it's easier for the people to see that it's sensible to cooperate also on the basic process of reconciliation. So those are my 5 lessons or principles, if you like, from the work of reconciliation that I've been engaged in when I was Prime Minister and since leaving office. And, it's never easy, by the way. And sometimes you go through periods of when it just seems that the differences are irreconcilable and that the process of reconciliation is hopeless. I mean, we reached a situation just a few months back, and I was attending a meeting in the Middle East. This was before we relaunched the process, and I was attending a meeting in the Middle East, and people were just literally, situation's hopeless, we're never going to be able to resolve it. And yet, actually, a few months later, we now have a negotiation back on track again. We had a situation just as I left office in 2007, where in Northern Ireland, the Reverend Ian Paisley, who some of you may remember from the Northern Ireland dispute, and Martin McGuinness from the Republican movement sat down in office together in a power-sharing arrangement. Now, I just want to tell you this, that if anyone had said, if I had said in 1997 when I came to power that Martin McGuinness would sit in the same room as Ian Paisley, they would have considered me mad. And if I'd said they'd actually be sharing power in a government together, I would have been certified. Right? Some people may have thought I should have been anyway, but it's the fact is no one could have foreseen that development. All the smart money would have been on that being hopeless. That is not going to happen, but it did. And so I guess my concluding thought is really this. The important thing about reconciliation also is never to give up on it. I mean, it is important. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. It's vital for the future of the country. Otherwise the debate wouldn't be happening. And however difficult it seems, and however big the gaps are, it's worth constantly trying to reconcile. And this is where the people themselves have also got to play a role. Because political leaders need to be empowered. Of course, leaders should lead, but it helps if when they look over their shoulder, they've got someone behind them. And one of the things that in every experience I have from the Balkans through to Northern Ireland, the Middle East, parts of Africa I work in today, is in order to have reconciliation, the leaders have to lead, but the people have to be behind them. And you never get a reconciliation without that strong popular support pushing and enabling and empowering the leaders to lead. So don't give up, however difficult it is. Carry on, because there is a huge shared opportunity for Thailand, and it would be a shame to waste it. And I'm quite sure in the end, by the way, you won't. So however difficult or bleak it looks right now, I'm certainly here today to say reconciliation can work, and where it works, it brings enormous benefit to the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Blair. Well put. And I think that you've covered a lot of ground, probably more ground than you realize, of your 5 principles. I think they are applicable to us nationally, for our national conflict, and also for our South. I think what you said about the majority-minority relations is critical here. The majority is here today. Minority, not so much here. And we have to somehow bridge that gap and create trust, operationalize, have a framework. I think starting with the realization that we have such great potential in Thailand, regionally and internationally, and also have a consistent or a convergent vision of our own future. So I think you've touched on many points. We'll come to it. I know that there will be lots of questions and comments this time, unlike at the university. Please, we will need to write them down and pass them up. So if you want to ask questions later on, we'll have ample time, and there will be an attendant collecting questions. Now let me proceed to Mr. Atisari, Honorable Mr. Marty Atisari. I know you're waiting your turn. You're not new to Thailand. You've come here before and worked with the Truth for Reconciliation Commission in Thailand, and you've been very patient with us and have shown a lot of goodwill. Mr. Ahtisaari was president of Finland from 1994 to 2000. He then worked as an international statesman, promoting peace, reconciliation all over the world, especially in his accomplishments, especially in Namibia, Aceh in Indonesia, and then of course Namibia and Aceh, and then we'll hear from your speech, your third region that you accomplished now. So please go ahead, the floor is yours. You have a half hour.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, before I start my presentation, may I say that I think it came through already from Tony Blair's presentation. I was deeply impressed when I was helping him in a small way in the Northern Ireland process to see how determined he was to see that this process would succeed. Because without his leadership, I don't think we would have ever seen the results in Northern Ireland. Therefore, I want to thank you once again, Tony, because it was a pleasure to work with you, because I have learned everywhere else where I have been involved that if that sort of leadership is not there, we can't achieve the results. Good luck, Tony. But dear friends, my great fortune is that I come from a country that has lived in peace and harmony for almost 70 years. No war has disturbed our life, no civil strife has interfered with our daily business. Calm, perhaps even a little dull, but safe and sound society. However, this has not always been the case. At the end of the First World War, Finland, a Grand Duchy within the Russian Empire, broke ties with Russia. Soon thereafter, in 1918, the Russian Revolution spread over the borders of the country. In many European countries, there were incidents of serious civil strife, even civil wars. Our country was one of those where the controversies between left and right, the whites and the reds as they were identified then, led to the brief but bloody civil war which took the lives of almost 37,000 fellow Finnish citizens. Even though the civil war took place in the context of a worldwide power struggle, that wasn't the only reason for the conflict. It also had very much to do with the ordinary people's social and economic grievances in the society. After the Civil War, what was decisively important for the recovery of the country was a determination for reconciliation between the whites and the Reds. Only some 10 years after the end of the Civil War, the Reds, the losing party in the war, was in government, properly elected and widely accepted. They too had modified their stand. They had abandoned their revolutionary ideas and accepted without reservation the principles of rule of law and a democratic form of government. All this constituted the basis for the resumption of normalcy in the life of our nation. Only some 20 years after the Civil War, Finland had attained a standard of living comparable with most European countries. That was no small achievement for originally a poor agrarian country. The harmonious political life was a good foundation for basic economic reforms. Even the Second World War, where we were entangled, did not break the new fabric of the society. And after that war, steady progress has continued in economic and political terms. But, dear friends, let's be frank. The deep wounds that the Civil War left into the minds and hearts of people took a lot of time to be healed from. Even during the last 10 years, we still have had a lot of discussion and analysis about the war and its reasons and consequences. It is always a different thing to make institutional arrangements and agree on those than truly reconcile and come into terms with one's past. But it is possible. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now turn into some of the key thoughts and lessons learned from my own career when talking about societal change and building peace in fragile society. I will focus on 3 different reconciliation processes, namely Namibia, Aceh and Kosovo, which I have been involved in. Even though each one of these reconciliation processes has taken place in different political circumstances and different continents, the main challenges of reconciliation have been the same. When I started my work as a special representative of Secretary General for Namibia in 1978, some of the observers said that the political challenges in that country and region were insurmountable. I never bought that argument. For sure, a huge number of things require deep political solutions. Issues such as land ownership, the recognition of liberation movements and territorial control had been debated for years. And now UN Resolution 435, adopted in September 1978 in the Security Council, managed to frame the process leading towards the ceasefire and nationwide elections. However, the process was not easy nor quick. The ceasefire took place only 10 years after the resolution and the election 11 years later in 1989. When talking and preparing for any meaningful reconciliation process, it is always easier to put words on a plan and plans on paper than start implementing the actual plans. This was also the case with Namibia. When one's history is full of mistrust and betrayal, the leaders and citizens of any given country have to face the difficulties of trust building by themselves. This cannot be outsourced. You can always learn from others, listen to the speeches of the experienced ones, but at the end of the day, the responsibility for the future always lies with the people, both leaders and citizens. In the case of Namibia's independence process, it was a group or assembly of 72 politically selected members that had to face these realities and start working together in responsible manner. This group had to produce a constitution which established a genuine multi-party system and a Bill of Rights. The task wasn't easy, but the members of the assembly understood that if they lost their moment, it would be the citizens of Namibia that would pay the price. They did an excellent work. The Constitution defines not only the framework for the political system and legislation, but clear definitions for fundamental human rights and freedoms of the citizens. In this collaborative spirit, the elections were held with the support of Namibia's neighboring countries and the international community, and the result was good. Now Namibia is a free country where different peoples and groups have managed to come to their sort of respectable accord with each other. They have a democratic system in place to tackle with everyday differences and political rivalries. One of the things I'm particularly happy about is that Namibia's record in good governance is commendable. According to the Mo Ibrahim Index of African Governance, Namibia is currently number 6 in the group of 52 African states. The index, which is a governance data index initiated by Mo Ibrahim Foundation, analyzes the performance of African countries and governments annually in 4 different main categories: safety and rule of law, participation and human rights, sustainable economic opportunity, and human development. And looks in these 4 main categories well over 80 different items in the society. In all this, Namibia is doing relatively well amongst its peer countries. For sure, good governance is not a challenge only for Africa or Asian countries. In fact, I would be eager to use the same methodology to assess also the performance of Council of European countries, the 47 Council of Europe countries. That would make a very interesting comparison. I hope that I succeed in getting that done before we even start talking that it could be done in Africa and Latin America and North America as well. The process leading to Namibian independence was long and required strong commitment and determination from the Namibians and the international community. Today, looking back to those years, it feels almost unbelievable that we managed to get all the key actors, the Western 5, US, UK, France, Germany and Canada, the Soviet Union, the Organization of African Unity, the South African government and all the political parties in Namibia, including SWAPO, to work towards a shared goal. One of the great lessons learned from Namibia clearly indicates that a durable solution can only be found if one is prepared to engage in discussions with his or her political opponents. It should also be noted that other unexpected benefits may follow successful reconciliation process. I believe, and that's what my South African friends have been telling me, that Namibia's experience also encouraged South Africa to expedite the change towards democracy and democratic change in South Africa. Dear friends, the peace process in Aceh, Indonesia, not so far away from here, was a bit different from Namibia, but with a lot of similarities. I personally got involved with Aceh peace process in late 2004. the process started very rapidly. We recall that that was a time when Aceh also suffered from tsunami disaster. Already in January 2005, the newly elected government in Indonesia and Free Aceh movement met in Helsinki to talk about the conflict that had lasted for almost 30 years. From the beginning of the talks, I had a feeling that I was surrounded by people who realized that they had in their hands the power to stop further suffering of the Acehnese people. I was surrounded by people who had realized what political responsibility and leadership means. During the negotiations, trust and confidence were gained gradually. Our starting point of the negotiations was, and I think it was proposed by the leader of the Indonesian delegation, Hamid Awaludin, the Minister of Justice, a peaceful solution with dignity for all. Not only for the conflicting parties, but for all people in the province of Aceh. We also had an extremely crucial principle in the Aceh negotiations which I introduced. Nothing is agreed before everything is agreed. This meant that neither party could claim any victories during the process and use media to communicate their constituencies how successful they had been in the negotiations in all the issues that were important for them. All the agreements were included in the Memorandum of Understanding and published only in the end. This gave peace for the negotiators to work. I must say that I admired the discipline of both parties in this regard, and it was a test whether they would be serious and follow what we had agreed or not. They clearly wanted to find a solution. One of the lessons learned from Aceh negotiations was that words are never enough. Trust can only be created if one party sees the others keeping the promises and to do as was agreed. In Aceh peace process, I made it clear to both parties that if genuine peace is the goal, both sides have to be prepared to make concessions and compromises. Even though some of the concessions might have felt painful during the talks, it is evident that both sides eventually gained much more than they had to give up. The process also showed how important it is that the country's political leadership is committed to finding a solution. We all bear a responsibility in the fragile societies, but it is clear that the leaders' responsibility is even bigger. Social and economic reforms, hand in hand with justice and equity, can only progress if all political parties are committed to them in the long term. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now briefly look at the case in Kosovo. Today there is much that the Kosovo can be proud of. With the passing of legislation and adoption of a constitution, addressing concerns of all communities as well as establishing state institutions, remarkable progress has been made. I especially welcome the setting up of the Constitutional Court, the ultimate guardian of Kosovo's constitutionality. It represents a launch of a most important body in the institutional architecture of this country. As was the case with Namibia and Aceh, the road leading to the current political stability hasn't been easy in Kosovo. Some 13,000 lost their lives in Kosovo conflict before the start of the Kosovo status process in 2005. So a lot has been achieved in terms of peace, in terms of absence of violence. But now Kosovo is also facing a serious reconciliation phase. How to root the culture of peace in the society between the citizens of Kosovo and between Kosovo and Serbia. Peace in Kosovo has to mean a new tone in rhetoric, in chambers of power, but also in the classrooms. It means that one has to acknowledge that the past was destructive, but now we must do better. Kosovo tells us that the reconciliation means that it is not about forgetting our past, but recognizing that your future can and must be different. I think there I appreciate what Tony Blair was saying. We have to keep in mind that we are looking to the future. Kosovo also tells us that any reconciliation work needs a lot of support from friends, small and big ones. Dear friends, all three experiences that I have been sharing with you today underscore the fact that in reconciliation and nation building, trust is everything. But it requires time, patience, and work. As the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Thailand also rightly points out in its recommendation, peace is not only an outcome, it is a process. It is important to realize that trust can also be fostered by giving people the tools to be architects of their own future. National leaders in government have to create political space for local leaders, both from powerful and marginalized groups, to shape the national agenda and the evolution of institutions. If any nation is about to build trust, it has to choose an open and wide road to walk together with anyone interested. Negotiation chambers can do only a part of the job. The true reconciliation can only be found in the behavior of all people, whether they are ministers, officials, activists, teachers, or neighbors alike. National reconciliation also has to be supported by political actions and egalitarian principles. Societies that have been conflict-prone for decades or even hundreds of years need to pay especially careful attention to the policies they promote and implement in their respective societies. During the difficult times, it is pivotal to assure that proper education, decent living, and health care are available to all citizens in an egalitarian manner. This is a precondition for any society to live in peace in the 20th century. We also need to find ways how to deal with the past injustices and grievances. There has to be a space and time to address them. We have to understand the meaning of societal memory, the ways we tell different stories from our past. At the same time, we must tolerate and respect these different stories. This is where we need reconciliation, open dialogue between conflicting memories. But in order to move on, we also have to find ways to think and teach differently. After the collapse of Soviet Union, much had been invested on teacher education and curriculum development in post-Soviet societies, with the aim of including the ethnic minority views in history textbooks. Official truth about the past must acknowledge the complexities, but it also has to be able to create a new future. Dear friends, in the beginning of my speech, I shared with you some experiences from my own country and reflected some of the deep wounds we also have had in our past. But by emphasizing good practices and lessons, I'm not at all claiming that all problems have been solved. Surely not. In Finland, like in so many European countries, we face serious economic problems at the moment. Our saving rates is too low to fund our needs of capital. Financing the future for the aging populations is a problem we need to solve soon, together with the fact that the youth unemployment has been on the rise already for some time. We also have to improve our performance by streamlining an overly bureaucratic apparatus of administration. These are politically demanding and sensitive tasks, which can only be met with political leadership and determination. I have no doubt that we will find these solutions, as we have found solutions to our problems in the past. Being able to solve emerging conflicts and political tensions in a peaceful manner tells us that even very serious domestic problems need not and cannot split the nation fatally. It tells us that open and genuine reconciliation effort can lead to success. It tells us that even after decades of mistrust and political rivalry, reconciliation can make a difference. It tells us that if only we have the political will and genuine commitment for peace, we can create a better future. And ladies and gentlemen, it clearly tells us that a new beginning is always possible. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ahtisaari. You have echoed a common theme here about what to do with the past, how to address the past. We heard from Mr. Blair that the past can be examined, but not to be judged for all. And from Mr. Ahtisaari, I particularly like your case of Kosovo. Apart from Namibia and Aceh, in Kosovo, Mr. Ahtisaari said that the past is not about forgetting the past, but it's about recognizing that the future can and must be different. I think when we hear this, we think about our own context, and it has a lot of resonance. Now, our next speaker is Ms. Priscilla Hainer. Ms. Hainer is an expert on transitional justice, truth commissions. In Thailand, we have a funny name for our truth commission. It's not truth and reconciliation, but it's truth for reconciliation, and some people think that that got us off on a wrong footing. But now, for transitional justice, there's a very technical modalities involved, and Ms. Hainer has written extensively, and she also is not new to Thailand. She has worked with the TRCT before, and she has come here repeatedly to help the reconciliation processes in Thailand. So the floor is yours, Ms. Hainer, for the next half hour.
Thank you very much. It's a real honor to be here with you today and to join such distinguished co-panelists this morning. I would like to begin by thanking all of those who have played a role in putting this event together, for the invitation to take part, in particular our moderator Titinan and his institute ISIS, as well as the many other people who have done such an impressive job in putting together today's conference. It's interesting that we were given actually quite a broad range as to the topics we could approach today. In fact, considerable freedom in exactly what we would like to speak to. And what's interesting is that the three of us, in one form or another, have chosen the subject of reconciliation. So I hope that I'm able to contribute a little bit more to what has already been a very rich set of presentations. I have had the pleasure, as our moderator has noted, of visiting Thailand several times over the last several years, in particular in providing a small bit of assistance to the Truth for Reconciliation Commission in Thailand. And every time I come back, I have been struck again with the richness of the conversations, the engaged and extremely focused and intelligent wide range of people that are focused on the challenges facing Thailand today. Of course, there are many challenges, as there are for any country at any time, I think. And I think Thailand has done well to recognize some of the special challenges that it is facing at this time. It's true that I have worked more on the subject of transitional justice than on other subjects in many countries around the world. And I do believe that transitional justice offers a useful range of possible policy approaches for countries that are either in transition or are addressing special challenges around justice and reconciliation in whatever context that may be. However, transitional justice is not a panacea. It does not resolve all problems of a country. One must think outside of the box, think creatively for each national context. And of course, as has been said, and I very much agree, those solutions ultimately will have to come always from that country themselves. Outsiders can suggest ideas, can comment, can provide interesting and sometimes useful examples from other places. But we as outsiders will never understand a country as well as nationals will. Thailand, of course, has concluded its Truth Commission, its TRCT. It has also provided reparations for a significant number of victims, and that is important. However, as in any country, that's not sufficient. More certainly needs to be done, and I think will be done, including with the assistance of some of the people here, to implement some of the work coming out of the TRCT, to undertake other aspects of work that does look like transitional justice in one form or another. But in fact, I think we need to think beyond that. The priority of reconciliation has been identified and prioritized by this government, clearly, and also as it was by the immediately prior government. The theme of reconciliation has been present for a number of years. There seems to be broad agreement in general terms that more effort is needed to move Thailand further along the path of reconciliation. What is not so clear to me is, in fact, what is exactly meant by the word reconciliation. Is it true that everyone is referring to the same thing when they emphasize the importance of a reconciliation platform? My experience in other countries is that this word, reconciliation, may in fact often mean different things to different people. This is not always intentional, and it may be something that we are not fully conscious of when we use this language. The idea of bringing a country together and reducing political tensions is of course hard to argue with. I think everyone would be in agreement with that. But is it clear, in fact, what this means in practical terms? And is it possible that the variations in the understanding of this concept are in fact pointing to quite different visions of a country's future? I'd like, therefore, to explore with you today several examples of what I have seen in other countries. Some of these examples offer warning signals as to what the risk may be of abusing the idea of reconciliation for the wrong purposes, or for using it as a means of manipulation or even coercion. But these examples also offer positive ideas, which I will return to in a few minutes. One common mistake, I believe, is to call on the need for reconciliation as a means to argue for a policy of forgetting, to turn the page on the past, to wipe clear all past sins and transgressions. This has sometimes led to the proclaimed justification for awarding amnesty to persons responsible for very egregious acts. This was what happened in Argentina 20 years ago. After several generals were tried and convicted for their role in disappearing thousands of persons during the dirty war in Argentina, the incoming president promptly offered a pardon to those generals, and they were immediately released from jail. He argued that this pardon was necessary for purposes of national reconciliation. This was roundly rejected by most Argentinians, and as a result, even the word reconciliation came to be seen as a tainted word, something that was negative, and even today is rarely used because of that association with the pardons and amnesty over 20 years ago. Indeed, this form of reconciliation based on forgetting is usually rejected by victims, and in my view, is an unacceptable and disrespectful approach. A second trend that we have seen, perhaps even more pernicious, is that of reconciliation by coercion. When a people are told that they must reconcile, it's almost guaranteed to end in failure, and in fact may even worsen the situation. A striking example of this was very recently, just a few weeks ago, in Egypt. After the military took over the government, their priority was to silence those who supported the deposed president. You, of course, have seen the large protests that occupied central Cairo for many weeks on end. There was a moment in the army's desperation, perhaps, to take control of the city, that they proclaimed that the opposition, those that supported the deposed president, had 48 hours to join the reconciliation platform. This was a clear threat that if they did not come on board and join the transitional military-led government, that force would be used against them. The idea that reconciliation can be achieved in such a manner, I believe, is highly dubious. I'm not sure that there's any example where that has been successful anywhere in the world. A final example of a misuse, in my view, of the concept of reconciliation is an approach perhaps best described as overcoming differences by denying, in fact, that they exist, by papering over those differences. Following the very tragic genocide that took place in Rwanda almost 20 years ago, the new government outlawed any reference to ethnicity in identity documents or in other documents. The idea was that Hutus and Tutsis, which were the two main ethnic groups, still are the two main ethnic groups in Rwanda, that they could not hate each other or fear each other if they could not identify, in fact, which group that they came from. Of course, the problem with that is that ethnic identity cannot be papered over so easily. It cannot be so easily erased. This prevented, in fact, this approach prevented a more in-depth look at what actually the root problems were of the country and to address those. I don't believe that covering over differences is very helpful in a context where there's a need to, in fact, understand and acknowledge and come to terms with differences that are real in society and the challenges that they present. Thus, I am arguing that reconciliation is not best achieved through forgetting, through coercion, or through a covering up. Then, what does this suggest about a more positive notion of the word? In short, what might reconciliation best look like if it were to be achieved? The best examples that I've seen from around the world are those that focus on a process and not on an end point. It may be, regrettably, in a sense, that reconciliation is not something that can be reached per se, but rather is a path that one begins down and then works very hard to continue on. To begin down this path and to strengthen and deepen the journey, many different kinds of initiatives are possible. And this is open to the imagination, the creativity, and the political will and commitment of those who are in a position to give this shape. This is also something that is highly dependent on the national context and national culture, and it's something that should not be imported from the outside or prescribed from the outside. An example of a process-led reconciliation program can be seen in Liberia in West Africa, where a National Truth Commission recommended an ambitious long-term program of community discussions, which they referred to as Palava Hut discussions, which was based on an indigenous process in Liberia that had been based in communities for many, many years. In East Timor, community elders brokered agreements between perpetrators and the communities themselves after a period of political violence about 14 or 15 years ago. This allowed the reintegration of wrongdoers into their local communities and led to apologies and arrangements of community service. So those that had undertaken physical harm, such as destruction of buildings and other physical damage to communities, could repay this through community service. And this was brokered through the role of community elders. It's a very specific solution to East Timor, not necessarily appropriate to other places, but an interesting process-led example. In South Africa, the Mandela government supported the Truth and Reconciliation Commission there, even when it was revealing, even when the commission was revealing very painful facts about the events and acts of the African National Congress itself, of the opponents to the apartheid regime. They themselves had committed serious violations of rights in the process of opposing the apartheid regime. Over several years of public hearings, one very fascinating and I think surprising aspect that became clear was that those persons who admitted to wrongs and had the strength to apologize and to acknowledge, in fact, what they had been involved in, they ended up stronger, both politically and personally. On the contrary, those who continued to deny, and there are important examples of persons who had continued to deny what had happened and didn't have the strength to acknowledge, they somehow were seen to be cast aside and were left outside the political fabric of the new South African political dispensation. Let us look then at the question of what the ingredients might be to a program or policy that leads a country down a reconciliation path. First, it is essential that the direction of this path is not pointed towards a specific political endpoint. In other words, if there's a hidden agenda, it won't work. Reconciliation can never mean, and I think everyone would agree with me here, reconciliation can never mean overcoming or fooling one's opposition in order to achieve one's own political purposes. And I stress this because, in fact, this is a common error that I've seen in a number of contexts. Given the strong political forces at play, certainly in many of the countries where I have watched or been involved myself, this is understandable, but it's very unlikely to succeed. Instead, the aim must legitimately be to build trust between parties and to identify common national interests and to work to build these common interests over time. Second, reconciliation cannot be rushed. While there should be no delay in getting started, the process itself must be treated with care and with respect. It must be based on communication, on listening, on carefully crafting a process that leads towards mutual national interests, engaging the interests across the political aisle. And third, let me not downplay the substance of the matter. Concrete measures can be taken in the area of political or legal reform, recognition and apology, economic empowerment, or development, and many other areas that I'm sure you all are well familiar with. Many specific measures were recommended by the Truth for Reconciliation Commission here in Thailand, and I feel that they deserve considerably more attention to see what can be implemented from those recommendations. In addition, there were reports that came from an investigation process by the People's Information Center and by KPI. And both of these reports should also be looked at because the recommendations between these efforts, these three efforts, in fact have many similarities. Before I conclude, allow me to return briefly to the issue of amnesty, which I very briefly mentioned earlier in the context of Argentina. I know that the subject of amnesty is an issue of considerable interest in Thailand at the moment. As with many issues, it may be an error to judge an amnesty proposal too narrowly by comparing it against established international legal guidelines. This would risk missing or misunderstanding the local context. However, I would suggest that any proposal for amnesty should abide by some basic principles. It should be respectful of victims. It should not be seen as serving specific political interests. And it should be attentive to fair process, both the process of consultation in crafting the amnesty and equally difficult, the process of exactly how that amnesty will be applied and implemented. For example, while an amnesty may waive criminal responsibility for certain specific crimes, it should never take away the rights of victims to know the truth. This suggests that investigations may have to continue, even if there's an amnesty that is put in place. In most national contexts, there are certain acts which can reasonably receive amnesty or pardon. The controversy around the amnesty bill in Thailand, including the fact that many victims' families have expressed concern or in some cases strong opposition to the proposed amnesty, should give us pause. As an international looking in, I know that the hard work on this issue must be done by nationals here in Thailand. But I would only hope that the basic principles that I have outlined here could be met. Let me close by making a final point on reconciliation more generally. The framing principles for, I think, all of the ideas that I have been looking at here today should be a commitment to democratic principles. True democratic space must be assured. There's an irony, in fact, in the vision that I'm trying to outline here, because as is reflected in some of the other speakers' remarks, while working to find common national interests, there will also, of course, be different views between political parties as to how problems should be addressed. That is natural and that is to be expected. Political parties will have different ideas about what should be done. To allow healthy democratic debate, there must be respect, however, for the rules of the democratic game. This will be seen in the space provided and preserved for public campaigning, lobbying, debate, and of course in fair governance. However, at the heart of political difference, there must be a common national interest accepted by all, that of putting first the interests of a peaceful and democratic country, one that respects the rights of all. It is through this overall vision that the path of reconciliation, I believe, might best be found. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Hena. Again, you have reinforced the previous presentations. Reconciliation should not be rushed. It should be a process that takes time. It should be genuine, robust. And you also have waded into the fray a little bit here by bringing up the amnesty. This is very much a sticking point for us in Thailand. The other presentations, I think you can look at the world, the other countries, but amnesty in Thailand is very controversial. Now the floor is open for questions, comments. I think we will take them. There's some attendants, some assistants on the side and in the back. Please write them up and I'll recognize you, and then you can seek a microphone and ask the question. Now, in the first round, I would like to give an opportunity for all three speakers, Ms. Hena, Mr. Azasari, Mr. Blair, to perhaps react to the other comments that you have heard. First, I also would like to pose initial round of questions, perhaps for you to elaborate some of the themes that you have touched on, now that you've heard the other presentations. From Mr. Blair's speech, his remarks, I think, very instructive for us. So your first point is that the future opportunities have to be, there's a shared future here, shared opportunities that has to be recognized. I want to make sure that we reach out to the audiences that we have at home because it's a very important principles that we don't have yet. That's why we are in the state that we're in. Second, you discussed the past, and this is a common theme from all presentations. What do we do about the past? I mean, there have been past injustices in the South for years and decades, going back 100 years perhaps. Nationally, we have had different colors doing different things. We've had everything from taking over Government House, closing down the airport, to burning Bangkok, central Bangkok buildings, arson attacks and so on. So the different sides see different realities, different paths. You mentioned that this can be examined, but not judged and not make judgments to satisfy everyone, because that won't be possible. You brought up how this all has to be operationalized, third principle, that you have to have a framework for the future. Well, how do you cooperate in the future? And then fourth, genuine democracy means the right mix and calibration of majority-minority relations. In Thailand, we have this big problem, and I can tell you that one side, majority, once they win power, it's a winner-takes-all game, as you alluded to. You have elections, electoral power, and that's it. You can do anything you like. And so the minority has this concern. They're unwilling to go along because of past abuses and so on. But in the process, the minority can also hold the entire system hostage. And that's why we're stuck. The minority won't play along because they've lost the game. Majority wins the game, wants to take over and dictate all outcomes. And this recalibration that we need between majority and minorities is critical. Now, finally, the fifth point that you brought up is very telling and relevant for our situation. The political system, the political process, the politics has to be effective and responsive. The problem that we have, Mr. Blair, there's a perception, there's a widespread perception that our elected politicians do not really function well. I mean, they win office and then we don't see them very much, and then many of them, you brought up the subject of corruption. There's a perception that our politicians could perform much better, and that we are beset with endemic corruption problems, and hence people don't have a lot of faith in the system. Now, my question to you, before I proceed to the question from Mr. Atisari, is that who should host this kind of dialogue and process? I mean, the Good Friday Agreement, your government was far-sighted and somewhat enlightened, really, to make concessions that cost you a lot, I think, politically at that time. I was studying in the UK, and very controversial, a lot of risks early in your government, early in your career, really, I mean, your leadership. And if it had stumbled, that could have, you could have taken some missteps. So who should host and who should own? I mean, this forum that we have is being hosted by us a little bit, but the government would like to own it and would like to also host it. Do we need a third party or some kind of an outside party? And if so, who can that be around here? Does it have to be a foreigner? But if it's indigenous, then which side do we look to for a fair hearing, fair process? Mr. Atisari, you very succinct cases, Namibia, Aceh, Kosovo, and we really appreciate your point about the past, not to be forgotten. Reconciliation not about forgetting the past, but seeing the future, a different kind of future that we must see. The Aceh case, there was a tsunami, the Boxing Day tsunami in 2004. I think that is something perhaps you can elaborate on. That was really the turning point. I think it has been accepted. Without the tsunami, we would not have had the agreement between the Indonesian government and GAM. So we don't want to have a tsunami here because, it's tragic, lots of people perished. But what would be the equivalent of an exogenous godsend, if you will, exogenous factor that could really uplift and make us get over this hump, right? I mean, if not a tsunami, then what can we look for that can be the catalyst for the peace process or reconciliation in Thailand. And for Ms. Hainer, many points you brought up, and I think I'll have to ask you about the amnesty because you went into some detail. Who should this cover? And is this indispensable without some kind of an amnesty or pardon program? In Northern Ireland, there were release of prisoners. That was key. In Thailand, do we have to release people? And if so, how wide should the net be cast? Cover everyone or some? Where do we draw the line? Very, very difficult for us. So first, Mr. Blair, perhaps who should host?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for that excellent summary of my speech. It's nice to know you were listening. Sometimes in the Northern Ireland process or in the Middle East process, you involve outsiders at certain points. You can do that. But in the end, the thing's got to be resolved by the people who are intimately connected with the dispute. And two things I would say about this, because I think obviously who hosts, well, you can debate that. You can have your type of institution, others that can host it. If you can find, obviously the more objective the people who are hosting it seem, the better, and so on. But I actually think the two things that I would add additionally, which I think really matter, and are very practical things, by the way. The first is that you need also to find forums in which people can speak very frankly to each other without it necessarily becoming a huge political issue. I had, in Northern Ireland, many times I would meet people quite privately, actually. And, without them thinking that if they were speaking to me, it was then going to become a big media story. And look, as you found, gathering your email traffic from the event, these things become very divisive. People shout in a very loud way nowadays. Everything's conducted at a high volume. But you need to find ways that the key people can have a dialogue that's quite private, where they also establish some personal relationships. I found in all of the reconciliation work I've been involved in, you need the key people to establish some sort of personal relationship in it. And the second thing is, I found both what President Adesari said and Priscilla said very interesting about the different elements that go into reconciliation. In the end, there's got to be a basic will. If that will isn't there, there's really nothing you can do. Because you can have any amount of process and any amount of different items, but you've got to have a will to overcome the differences or to end up in a situation where you can manage to find the will to get rid of the things that are going to stand in your way, even if it's quite costly. I remember one towards the very end of the negotiation of the Good Friday Agreement, we got to a position where the unionists, there was a particular building that the government had used, that they'd held many talks that had always failed. And they came to hate this building, right? And anyway, the building was called Maryfield. And they insisted that it was shut. Now, when they first came to see me, because the Northern Ireland accent is quite unusual, and they said to me that they required Maryfield to be shut. Maryfield being the home of Scottish rugby. And so they give me this demand that I thought they meant where the Scottish rugby holds their big matches, I had to shut this stadium for some reason. I didn't. By that time, I was prepared to do it if it brought peace, but I didn't quite know why they were asking it. Anyway, we finally understood that they didn't mean the Murrayfield, the rugby place, they actually meant this building. And in the end, you know, the other people wanted to keep it. We just had to find a way through. And, you know, that will, if that will isn't there, there's nothing you can do, because, by the way, there are 15 different things that you can use to sink the reconciliation. You know, any of these things can be used to do it. So you've got to decide, almost psychologically first, that it's sufficiently important. And the final thing I'd say is language matters in these situations. You know, if you want to reconcile, you've got to try to speak with some understanding of the other person's narrative about the situation. You know, I think what was quite interesting was all three of us, in a way, were saying, you're never going to change people's thinking about what's happened in the past, right? That narrative isn't going to change. What can happen is you can agree you've each got your own narrative, but you want to overcome it for the future. And the language you use in a process of reconciliation is extremely important, because it can indicate sensitivity or it can indicate obstinacy. And you know, obviously it's better that it indicates sensitivity. So you know, one of the things I constantly say about the Middle East peace process is it will never work unless the language each side uses about the other gives some sense that even if you may not agree with their narrative, you at least understand why they're saying it. And that can of itself help to bring people closer together.
You were the government engaging in peace talks with the IRA and Sinn Féin. As a government, the Thai government now is trying to promote reconciliation forums such as this. What would you say to them? What would they have to do to cultivate a sense of trust from the other side?
Well, look, one thing I've learned in a long political life is that you shouldn't tell people how to run their own business. So, I mean, I don't, you know, I'm not I can't tell you what I think the Thai government should do. They're going to have to work that out for themselves. I mean, I think, for me, what I can say is what I think you can learn from elsewhere. But I found, when I came to power, for example, my political party had a long-standing policy for a united Ireland, right? I realized there was no way we could be seen as objective helpers of this process when the heart of the issue was united Ireland or not, if my own political party had a policy for united Ireland, right? How would people see us as objective? So I actually changed that policy very deliberately. So I tried to clear a lot of the obstacles out of the way, and I also tried to be very honest about the failings of British government in the past. So, you know, I think it's, you know, my advice to any government in this situation is to try so far as is possible to put yourself in the other person's shoes and then try and go a little bit towards them. Because if you don't, if there's not a sense of reaching out, then, you know, it's very, very hard. But, you know, that means the people on the other side have also got to be prepared to reach back. You know, that's why I say in the end, there's got to be the will. And, you know, you were talking earlier about what type of forums. I mean, I think there's lots of different forums you can have, but I think what's really important as well is that a sense from the people comes out that they say to the politicians, look, because the people don't get involved in the details, is my experience, but they do get involved in the sentiment, in the feeling. And if the people are there saying, sort it out, then I think the politicians are more likely to achieve that and do it. So, you know, I can't, and it wouldn't be appropriate for me to start telling the government or the opposition what they should do, but I think it's fairly clear if you really want reconciliation, you're going to have to try and find a way of reaching out towards each other.
Thank you. There are more questions for you, by the way, so we'll come back to you shortly. Mr. Atisari, before you answer about catalysts, about tsunami and in Aceh, there's a question from the floor relates to your presentation about the role of education, how education can promote, perhaps to the extent that it can promote reconciliation. Now, I would like to recognize Mr. Alan Verstein, please. Okay, I'll assist you. So the question is, how can education play a role in reconciliation and also within the Thai context?
ศาลนั้นจะมีบทบาทอย่างไรในเรื่องของการที่จะเป็นตัวเร่ง
Before I answer any questions, I would like to tell a story about my experience, very intriguing one which has a direct bearing on Northern Ireland and South Africa. I got all of a sudden a call when I visited South Africa from Cyril Ramaphosa, my friend who we both worked in Northern Ireland and inspected a number of IRA arms dumps. But what Cyril had to tell me was that would it be possible your government to invite the different political parties from Iraq to come to Finland, and we would choose 3 people from the opposite parties from South African peace process and Northern Ireland. So de Klerk's people sent 3, ANC 3, IRA and Republicans and Unionists 3 posts. So there were 12 people who many of them had been branded terrorists in the past. And their task was to meet the Iraqis and tell what mistakes they had made so that Iraqis could avoid the same. Then they withdrew, let the Iraqis speak. Iraqis agreed on a number of things, and when they watched very carefully after a few months, they even signed in Parliament an agreement. Not that this brought peace, but I thought it was a marvelous contribution of those who had been going through these processes. Now, how much tsunami influenced? Of course it did help. If 170,000 people die and international community is extremely generous, everyone realizes that if you can't actually make peace, you can't utilize that money, that generous offer funding for reconstruction of the society. It definitely helped. But I think we would have made peace. It might have taken longer. Indonesian government wanted to show a video about the tsunami and its damage done in Aceh. GAM delegation didn't want to see it. They refused to see it. In the place where I held the talks, the machinery unfortunately didn't function, so I had not broken it, but it simply didn't function, so we never saw the video. So that took care of that. But I think the mere fact that there had been negotiations for cessation of hostilities in Aceh, which were organized by the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, and they lasted for 3 years. Agreement lasted only half a year. But I must say that those negotiations also helped, because people were meeting so many times that despite the fact that the ceasefire didn't hold, it definitely helped. But again, elections helped in Indonesia because there was a new government which was determined to make peace in Aceh. Had that not happened, it would have been much more complicated. So there were many positive factors that helped. I think education is absolutely important. Let's look at the Balkans. Tony Blair has been referring to that. Take Bosnia-Herzegovina. There are 3 history books. One for Serbs, one for Croats, and one for Serbians. It reminds me the negotiations I was sharing with David Owen and Cyrus Vance as a chairman of the Bosnia-Herzegovina working group in Geneva, how they all had, when they wanted to talk to me, they presented a totally different picture of what had happened in the past. They went back a few hundred years. And it wasn't terribly exciting to listen to them. But this is the fact of life. And I think when I listen discussion about amnesty or how to deal with the past, I think one thing we have to achieve in the peace negotiations and peace agreement is that we get a start for the new beginning, that none of the atrocities that were happening could never occur in a society again. That's the sort of half victory. My advice for reconciliation would be, I know it has been encouraged by Tony Blair and his colleagues as well in Northern Ireland, is start it with small. Start it with in local communities, more informal than formal. Because when people get together as they used before the fighting started, they can come back. And there are different groups, including the religious ones, who have played an extremely useful role in most of the conflicts on local level. In Aceh, in our agreement, we discussed that there should be a new court for human rights and Truth and Reconciliation Commission. None of these have happened. Sometimes I think that in this sort of conflict situation, it is important that first reconciliation takes place between central government and local government, because they have to learn to work with each other. My organization, Crisis Management Initiative, stayed 7 years in Aceh and Indonesia. Then I told them that this is enough, because we are not helping you anymore. You turn to us instead of talking with each other. You have to learn to solve the practical problems. So I said, farewell. They would have liked us to stay forever. But I said, it's counterproductive. If you want to consult us, me and my colleagues, you know our telephone numbers in Finland, but we will disappear. And I think they have learned to deal with difficult issues. That's part of the reconciliation process as well. There are so many elements in the reconciliation that I think we have to recognize all the possibilities we can have. And hopefully in the end of the day in Bosnia-Herzegovina, there's one history book.
Thank you, Mr. Ahtisaari. Before we go to Ms. Hena, there's a question from the floor relates to the amnesty bill. So I recognize Eric Popat. Please just tell us your affiliation and go ahead and ask your question. Is there a microphone? Just please speak up and I'll try to help you repeat it.
My question was...
Tell us your affiliation first, please. The previous was from Bangkok Business Brief.
Eric Poppart from the UDD. My question is quite simple, really. If the amnesty bill in Thailand that currently being discussed in the parliament, if it was done according to the international practice, can it help promote reconciliation in Thailand, or do you have any other ideas?
So there are two related questions for you, Ms. Hena. Do we need an amnesty bill? How wide should it cover? How wide to cast the net? And the version that we have now being debated in Parliament, I don't know if you've seen the details of it, but do you think that's on the right track?
Thank you very much. The question of amnesty in any context will always be difficult and will often be very controversial. And part of the difficulty is that there's no clear answer to the questions that you're putting forward, that there's only a few general guidelines from the international legal side as to what should or shouldn't be included in amnesty. And even there, it's not crystal clear where the line would be drawn. So if you try to apply those guidelines to the context of Thailand, it only provides a little bit of help. And I don't, as I tried to suggest very briefly earlier, I don't believe that that should be the primary starting point and certainly not the ending point to answer the questions that you have put forward. In a sense, when you look at amnesty models and processes in different countries, you can ask a number of different questions. You can ask, as Titinan has put, who should be covered or what crimes should be covered. And in fact, it is possible and it may well be recommended in a context where the numbers are relatively small in terms of possible persons covered. It may be possible to identify exactly who would be covered, or certainly to be much more precise as to exactly what crimes would be covered by the amnesty. The version that I have seen, and it's a translation, so of course there's always room for difference there, but it wasn't perfectly clear to me from the language as it was starting in the first reading exactly where the line would be drawn on some of those questions. So it seems to me that it would be useful to provide and to find more clarity as to exactly what would be covered by the amnesty. A third question is a procedural aspect of, as I said earlier, how will such an amnesty be applied? Is it something that's immediate? Is it something that would, in fact, have any kind of conditionality to it? There's been some very interesting amnesties in various countries around the world where those persons who receive amnesty either have to, for example, tell the full truth about what they're involved in, and I'm sure you all are most familiar with the South African example in that respect. Or in other cases, one receives amnesty with a condition attached in terms of your future behavior. And even in the context of Northern Ireland, and of course my colleague here on the panel is much better placed to speak to this, but those who were given pardons and released from jail, that was also, in a sense, a license that was attached to conditionalities on future behavior. Now, these kinds of models are not appropriate in every context, and I'm not trying to prescribe that for Thailand, but perhaps I am trying to suggest that the technicalities and today, the sophistication that we have seen in different kinds of amnesty legislation around the world, it's a bit of a different game than where we were even a few years ago. There's been some very interesting work. There are some very interesting models. The difficulties that you are confronting today, I think, is to be expected. What's important is that there is a conversation around that there's a very thorough looking at exactly what will be covered there, and it's something that is seen to serve the national interest as a whole. I know here, perhaps as a final remark, one could identify different, perhaps, categories of persons or acts that might be covered. Persons that were involved in protests and may have charges just from being involved in the protests at the time several years ago. Persons that perhaps took part in property crimes such as arson, or persons that took part in weapons-related crimes. Now within that, some people may have been involved in human rights abuses, and I think the critique from experts from the international level has been to say that international guidelines would be very clear as to human rights abuses should not generally receive amnesty. But that really doesn't answer, to end where I began, that really doesn't answer some of the bigger questions. That doesn't necessarily mean that other kinds of crimes should or shouldn't receive an amnesty. That is entirely a national question. It may or may not be appropriate, but what's important is that there's a full discussion about exactly how far that should extend. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we come back to Mr. Blair. I think we have to address this question. the international situation is precarious now with looming response to perhaps looming response to Syria. So you've been involved with this. There's a question about, let me just call on the reporter here from the Nation Multimedia Group, Jirawi. So this will be the subject of Middle East. Jirawi Kittisin from Nation Multimedia Group. Go ahead.
Okay, my question is actually directed to the former British PM. What is your view towards the Syrian situation? Recently you wrote about intervention is bloody, but standing aside is far worse. Could you explain more about, your views in that sense? Is it more like you think is it more like you're supporting the U.S. sending the troops in more? Just elaborate. Thank you.
Before you answer, Mr. Blair, sorry, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, before I answer, I was not really going to answer. I think we're best to keep this on reconciliation. I mean, I'm very happy to talk another time about Syria.
Let me recognize point taken. I think we respect that. Khun Prida Tiasuwan, you have a very short point that is kind of a question. Please go ahead.
Question to Mr. Blair. I always remember your good job in the first Blair, of course. The dealing with the IRA situation, I was in the middle of it. Basically trying to make sure that where I'm going, I'm not hitting into the middle of the bomb planted by the IRA. So I always remember what you have done there. I also remember that Reverend Ian Presley was so anguish. The language he was using was so hard. How do you get him to come around? I mean, let's have two most important factors that Ian Presley eventually came around. Thank you.
Thank you. It's such a very good question. I mean, I think there were many other people that did it, but I did in two ways, I think. The first is a constant process of engagement, so to establish an actual personal relationship, because he could be very tough to deal with. So that personal relationship became important. But secondly, if you want reconciliation, you do have to try and create, this is something we haven't spoken about so far, but I think is important. You have to try and create an atmosphere which has some stability in it, and where people can relax enough to do give and take. We just reflecting on what Priscilla was saying a moment or two ago about amnesties and so on. I mean, the issue with a lot of these things is, do people feel it's an objective process or there's something going on behind it? Right? In order to get them to accept a process, whether it's around amnesty or around any part of reconciliation, you need an atmosphere in which people start to want to come together a little bit. And that's why I think, what President Ahtisaari was saying earlier is very important. Sometimes you can begin with things that aren't directly about the issues you need to reconcile over. So you may begin with things that, so for example, one of the things we did in Northern Ireland was we got some common agreement over what we wanted for the Northern Ireland economy. Right? So both of them wanted jobs for their young people. Both of them wanted improvements in education, which, by the way, I think is fundamentally important in all of this. And so we were able to start establishing, through those what I would call bridgeheads to a better atmosphere through that type of policy work. And one other thing, just to throw in case I don't get another chance, everyone is always very nervous of involving outside people. And as I say, in the end, you've got to do it yourselves. The only thing I would say, my own experience, is that from time to time, outsiders can help by just creating that sense of objectivity in any activity. So when I asked President Adesari, along with the South African, Cyril Ramaphosa, the question was, were the IRA disarming? If we said they were, people wouldn't believe us. If they said they were, people wouldn't believe us. The other lot could never say that they weren't because they just couldn't say they weren't. So we brought in two respected people from the outside who other people were going to find hard to dispute their findings. So I think that these are the, and that was very important in getting people like Ian Paisley to say, well, okay, there must be some change here because this is being authenticated, as it were, by some respected people. So I think there are, you know, sometimes with this process of reconciliation, sometimes the best way to start it is not, you know, head on, but in ways in which you create stepping stones to a process that is credible.
Thank you. We'll take two broad questions now. First from Kunisha Hiranburana Tuatam. She is the wife of a colonel who lost his life during the confrontations that we've had. This was in April 2010. So her question has to do with KunishaครับKunisha's question is a short one. You know, how to address, promote trust when the party in the conflict. Go ahead, Kunisha.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask Excellency Tony Blair that in the case of Thailand, the government itself is a party concerned to the incident in 2010. So how should the government take role to build trust in this case? And if maybe the question to Ms. Priscilla Hainer, if it happens to be that the government party still insists to push the amnesty bill to the parliament without listening to those who don't agree, could you please foresee or forecast for us that what's going to happen considering to your experience from other countries? Thank you.
Thank you, ขอบคุณครับ Let me just take one more from Bong Kwan, Swadhipak. A question about our democratic institutions seen as out of sync. They're not in balance. We have a very strong executive, dysfunctional, non-performing legislative branch, and sometimes they're seen as abusive of their electoral mandate, very strong electoral mandate. So over the years, we've had an assertive military and an activist judiciary. So this question has to do with how to regain our balance among the democratic institutions. Bong Kwan, by the way, is a graduate from John Kwan University International Relations Department and currently studying at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Go ahead, Bong Kwan.
Thank you very much, Ajahn Titiman. This question is, I think, related to the speech made by Mr. Blair about the judiciary. In the case where the judiciary system seems to be, like the objectiveness of the judiciary seems to be questionable, it can also obstruct the reconciliation process initiated by the government or other parties. So especially in the case where the judiciary tries to overturn the decisions made by the government or the parliament, which seems to establish more connection to the people. What do you think about this case, or what should be the solution to this case? Thank you.
So these two questions are open for the panel. Starting with you, perhaps, Mr. Blair.
Well, first of all, in respect to the first question, and can I say I'm sorry, I'm for your for your loss, and I understand why the feelings of anyone who will have lost a loved one in what happened in 2010, those feelings will be very deep. Having dealt with similar types of situations, not just in the context of Northern Ireland, but elsewhere, I think, part of the purpose of the Truth for Reconciliation Commission, as I understand it, was to try and describe those events in which people at least felt that they had been heard and listened to. And part of the difficulty, I think, again, we were all agreed on this, is you can't forget the past, and it's completely unreasonable for the victims of any tragic events such as those that happened in 2010. You can't expect them to forget what has happened. And you've got to listen and to hear the victims. At the same time, and this was the hardest thing I had to do in Northern Ireland, as saying to people, but we have to find a way for the future that allows those things not to happen again. But this will never happen unless the voices of the victims are heard and are respected and listened to. In respect of you were talking about there's a feeling that the elected officials aren't delivering. By the way, this is not an exclusively Thai problem. I can tell you, you'd find that said by most publics about most elected officials, although, as I always say, the public do elect them in the end. But I think that, that's why I say that I think that the policy agenda for change and improvement in the country is a very, very important part of reigniting trust in the whole political process. And look, part of the trouble with modern politics is that it's conducted in a very harsh environment. The media tends to be can be very partisan. Social media has actually multiplied the noise in which politics is conducted. And here's the other thing that I always say to people: politics is actually a tough business. Everyone likes to complain about the politicians, but actually it's tough. The issues are tough. One of the things people used to say to me when I was Prime Minister is they used to say to me, listen to the people. And I would say, I am listening, but they're saying different things. So, you can listen to the people, but that doesn't help you in the end make up your mind. You've got to lead. And I think one of the things that's important today is that politicians have to communicate with their people in a far deeper and more open way than before, because the public, in the old days, in our system, I suspect the same in yours, the political leader would say something and the public would sort of, well, okay, and then they go along with that. And it doesn't happen anymore. Everyone's got an opinion. And the political leaders got to absorb that but still give leadership. So I think that relationship is very, very important. And the institutions that therefore govern politics, including the judiciary, to come to the question that was asked, have got to be seen to be objective. There's no secret about the rule of law. The rule of law works on the basis that it's objective. If it's not perceived as objective or is not objective, you've got a problem. And then what happens is that reduces the level of people's trust in the institutions. Now, as I say, I'm not an expert in the Thai judiciary, and I don't want to comment on it at all, because I'm not qualified to. But, I know in my own situation in the UK, the independence of the judiciary and its genuine impartiality is a vital part of our democracy functioning. If that wasn't there, people would feel I'm taking to the street because I can't get redress properly. So that is, an absolutely vital part of the picture. And where I think, one thing I would say about international experience is I think Priscilla's absolutely right. When you come to something like amnesty, frankly, each situation is very different. It's quite hard to draw up some very independent rules. In other areas, it's not. And the rule of law is one of them. Those rules are clear. They just need to be applied. And that's why sometimes what helps in these processes is when you have to set up a framework for the future, and I had to do this constantly because we were changing institutions in Northern Ireland the whole time. We had to change the police, we had to change the judiciary because they were all regarded as the property of one side or another. We had to change the system of government. We had to make major institutional change. And on each occasion what we did was we said, here is international experience and we're going to apply it. And that was the only way of getting out of what would otherwise be a situation where people would say, one side would say, well, you're pulling the wool over our eyes here. You say you're creating a new institution, but you're not really. It's a front for something else. The only way of overcoming that was for us to say, well, here's international practice, we're going to apply it. And it's in that limited way, I think, but important way, that you can reach for lessons abroad.
Thank you. Before Mr. Ahtisaari gives his answers, we have a lot of questions here about what should Thailand do? How could your insights and experiences benefit Thailand? And I know this is very direct and perhaps outside the scope of your preparations, but in your reflections, perhaps you can reflect, you can touch as much as you feel appropriate about the South. There was a question about your experience in Aceh and how it might be applied and what lessons to tease out for the Southern Malay Muslim insurgency in the southernmost border provinces of Thailand. Mr. Ahtisaari.
Before I try to say something on that, it's perhaps useful to remind us what long-time Prime Minister Juncker from Luxembourg said about politicians. He said, we politicians, in most cases we know what to do, but we have not yet found out the way how to be re-elected if we do what should be done. So that's perhaps something to be kept in mind. I think the important thing is that in every situation, whether we talk about southern Thailand or not Thailand at all, is that government makes a very clear commitment that it wants to start talking with those adversaries in that part of the country and try to find out a thorough study also what the expectations on both sides are. I can tell you from Aceh negotiations, I learned a lot from that because GAM wanted independent Aceh and Indonesian government would not have given that. They said, we want to give you a special autonomy. There was already a law on that and that could be then improved. I had never met anybody from GAM in my life. I knew that leadership was living in Stockholm. I invited them to see me. And I told them that, look, I don't think any harm is done that we sit here and I'm prepared to help you and see what the government is prepared to offer you. If you don't like what the government is offering you, because it's definitely not going to be independence, you can go back to Sweden and live your life there and die there. Sweden is not a bad place to live. In the end, they said they are coming. And that showed clearly, and all those earlier answers that I gave from tsunami and earlier negotiations, that attempts had been made. But I think both sides have to be serious because it's very difficult to engage as a government if the other side continues with what they have been doing in the past, that makes it very often nearly impossible to start the process. It requires informal consultations, and that's normally a type of thing that can only be done by nationals. We outsiders can be consulted on what we have learned from other experiences, but we can't be running those. It's a national task always.
Thank you. Hena?
Yes, thank you. The question put to me was, what will happen if the amnesty bill, which is currently being debated in Parliament, does go through? And of course, I can't know the answer to that, nor would I try to guess. I think that will depend on two things. One is the content of the final amnesty, if that does go through, and the second is the process to get there. You know, I know that the subject of amnesty has been stated very clearly, repeatedly in the press by the opposition party as one of their high priorities for attention and discussion, and in fact linking a better process around a proposed amnesty to engagement in various reconciliation initiatives by the government. I think that tells us a lot as to the importance of this issue, obviously, and this isn't news to people here. But I wonder, since I really am not the person to try to answer these questions, since Chichinan, since you mentioned that there are some representatives associated with the opposition party here, whether it might be useful or appropriate to ask them to give comments as well on some of the issues that we're discussing. Thank you.
We can take a quick comment. We're running out of time, but I would yield the floor to anyone from the Democrat Party or the minority voices that are not as well represented here. Dr. Surin Piswan, please. I'm sorry to have to ask you to be concise.
Thank you very, very much. I will be concise. I'm not here as a representative of the Democrat Party. I'm here on my own and very much appreciative of all the wisdom that have been shared with us by the distinguished speakers. Now, let me just refer to that particular issue. My sense is that the request for the delay or the request for the withdrawal of that particular item from the agenda of the Parliament was in itself a test of goodwill. You were talking about a long process to build these trusts. President Athasari talked about trusts. Prime Minister Blair talked about the need to have an effective political democratic framework in order to implement the reconciliation process. Now, I think that was one test that I think the opposition or people on the other side were looking for, that it should not be rushed, and that's exactly, Priscilla, your point, should not be rushed, not a goal, a process. And let everybody take part in that process. And first, it has to be recognized that there will be some need for give and take, some need for accommodation. And I think that's on that side, they are not seeing what is coming. So the division continues. Now, all three of you were talking about not outsourcing this kind of thing to anybody else from outside. All three of you are talking about the rules and principles and the substance, Prime Minister Blair, of democracy. The question is this country is not divided by just two parties, the government and the opposition, like in any other effective form of democratic governance. It is being influenced. It's being powerfully influenced from outside through Skype. I mean, it has been frustrating to all people inside who have been exactly what you were trying to say. Try to come to terms with each other. Try to build that middle ground. Try to visualize that future that you can share. And it has to be a better future. But every time they started this, there is an interference from outside. You have been candid, Mr. Moderator, and I think that serves this function very well. And I think all the three speakers have been very, very candid. And I think we have to be candid. This is one malaise that somehow affects our determination to reconcile with each other, interference from outside. Now, you need to recognize this fact. You need to give it a serious consideration, what to do. My question is, in your experiences, all three speakers, have you seen, have you had any cases in any country that the country is being run not by the two parties inside, opposition and government, but it's externally influenced from outside? Respectfully asking the question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. As you can see, our former Secretary General of the ASEAN is always flamboyant and articulate. He says he's not from the Democrat Party, but in fact this is a view that is very much consonant with what the Democrats would say, and very much reflects our majority-minority dilemmas. So here we have a minority view that thinks that the outside interference is a problem. The majority thinks that the outside is the inside. The outside is the inside. The outside interference is the real leader that they voted for. And hence our division continues. Now I know time is run out. We can continue this, Dr. Swind, over lunch. You know, when I began this endeavor, I knew that there was a lot of risks for you too, to come to tell Thailand what to do. This is a big risk, and you didn't do that. Not even talked about Syria. And you both have been involved in our TRCT, and we really appreciate your efforts. And I knew that we couldn't be worse off, right? I mean, we divided. I mean, if you have this forum, you say whatever you say. If it's just a passing day, passing comments, inconsequential, then we wouldn't be worse off. We already are divided, and it's been prolonged, protracted. On the other hand, I think that we have ended up on the upside today because what you've said is very much the problems that we have from your reflections. Majority, minority, that dealing with the past must not be done at the expense of the future, that the future has to be shared, has to be a sense of shared opportunities. There are many other questions, by the way. I want to apologize if we cannot take them all. But broadly speaking, I want to thank all of you for sharing your thoughts. This is not a panacea. This is not a one-size-fits-all exercise, and it's not the last speaking series. We are still in the process of trying to bridge this gap, and so far, not so successful. Minority won't play. Majority wins and knows that it's winning, so it's trying to kind of close out the game. And somehow we have to envision a new common future so that all will play by the rules and the winners respect the losers, and that all voices somehow are taken into account. So thank you very much, Mr. Blair, Mr. Adesai, Ms. Rina. And now we have